All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's BU Professional Development webinar, Constructive Salary Negotiation, Maximizing Value Through Friendly Negotiations. My name is Dan Gardner, and I'm a member of the Career Programs team here in the Office of Alumni Relations. Today's webinar is sponsored by BU Alumni Relations as part of our annual Alumni Career Week series, and it's offered to our 335,000 alumni around the globe. Throughout your career, BU is committed to helping you define and achieve your professional goals. We aim to do this by providing alumni with with access to a series of valuable online tools, social media communities, and I know that we have alumni joining us today from faraway places like Dubai, Beijing, Palm Bay, Florida, Long Beach, California, Peoria, Arizona, Cedarburg, Wisconsin, and as always, dozens of Massachusetts alumni from towns like Belmont, Bedford, Upton, Falmouth, and many more. For each and every one of you out there, please know that we really do value your opinion on this and every program that we offer. Now, before I introduce today's speaker, just a few brief housekeeping notes. As you know by now, this webinar is being hosted on our Zoom online meeting platform. And if you experience any trouble with the audio or visual portions of the presentation, we're going to ask that you please contact Zoom support, and you can reach them at 1-888-799-9666. Today's presentation is being recorded and will soon be available for on-demand viewing on the Alumni Association website. You can find it at bu.edu/alumni. Our speaker today is very eager to answer any questions that you have, and you're welcome to submit them throughout the presentation. You can do that by finding the Q&A box. Just hover over the top or bottom of your screen and select Q&A. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for the day, BU College of Arts and Sciences alumnus, Scott Singer. As founder and president of Insider Career Strategies, Scott guides individual and corporate clients through job search and hiring processes. He can help consulting on anything from resume writing, interview coaching, developing LinkedIn profiles, and helping professionals manage their image. During almost 2 decades of in-house corporate HR and staffing firm experience, Scott brought his knowledge, skills, and talents to national and international corporations in a diverse range of industries, with major corporations such as Motorola, Ryder, Bacardi, Burger King, and LVMH. Scott's educational credentials include his bachelor's degree from Boston University and an MBA from the University of Michigan Dearborn. He holds globally recognized credentials in the career development field. He's a certified professional resume writer and a certified professional career coach as well. In addition, he's a member of the Forbes Coaches Council, a community of top business and career coaches. Scott, thank you so much for being here today. The floor is all yours.
Daniel, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Welcome, everyone, to Constructive Salary Negotiation, Maximizing Value Through Friendly Negotiations. So thank you for being here. This is me. Sorry, can't do anything about the appearance, but as Daniel had mentioned, president of Insider Career Strategies, I'm not going to belabor this. BU 93, although they called it CLA in those days, so if that tells you anything about my age, we can have another discussion on age and the job search someday. MBA from University of Michigan and corporate recruiter. So let's dive right into the content. So let's start with perceptions about salary negotiation. Salary negotiation is, and I'm sure everyone's well aware of this on this call today, that salary negotiation is often the most difficult, challenging, tenacious, and unfriendly often process in the whole job search strategy. And what you end up with is people on both sides of the table feel that the other is sitting around with bags of money. From a company standpoint, the company believes that the employee is just trying to get rich, and that the employee feels the company is just being cheap with them and not willing to spend money. The truth of the matter is that that really is a couple of perceptions. Yes, there are always cases, there's always individuals who are money motivated, and let's not minimize it. Money is, of course, a very important part of the negotiation. It's an important part of the job search, but it is only one component. But it's often, there's a lot of subtlety to it, and things that can really that are other factors that definitely influence the process. So let's talk about the truth about salaries. So the first thing is that salaries are driven by market data. And what I mean by that is that there are a lot of companies, Mercer not the only one, but there's a lot of different compensation associations that do research on what the market looks like, not just geographically, but in terms of the skills. And a lot of companies also use what's called salary banding. And what that means is that, let's say you've got an engineer, the engineer salaries to start at the level that you're looking at can be anywhere from between 50 and 70,000, 50,000 for the lower end experience and 70,000 for the higher end experience. And often the company structures don't allow people to go outside those bands. And an important piece is that each company has its own compensation philosophy. I've been at companies whose philosophy is to pay at the middle of the market. You know, this is what the average person in this market makes. This is what we're going to offer. I've seen companies that are also, you find a lot of the tech companies that have a lot of money to burn. They tend to go on the higher end. They want the top talent. And you'll see companies that tend to be towards the lower end. But each company has its own philosophy, and they generally tend to follow that philosophy as they make offers and work with their talent. Another piece to think about is that benefits do matter a lot. There's a lot of different pieces that come up in the compensation package, everything from health insurance to dental to 401k to pension plans. These are a large part of the equation, and often when a company is putting together an offer or putting together its salary structures, they are looking at the benefits as part of the total compensation. Another piece of this is that variable compensation is a factor. For those of you who aren't familiar, variable means bonuses, it means commissions, it can mean annual incentives that are part of the an employee's contract or their goals. Variable compensation matters. So sometimes what you'll see is that a company will pay a little bit lower on the salary and higher on the variable side. And then another factor to consider is that there's often less flexibility for entry-level roles. People that are coming out of school generally tend to, with a fresh bachelor's degree, for example, or even at the MBA level, will often come out with similar experience levels or similar types of backgrounds. So what happens is that they typically will have less flexibility in terms of how they offer that. It's more of a fixed rate. Now, it's important to understand that companies, employers really do care about getting compensation right. There are several factors that play into this. This isn't just something that they should go into it willy-nilly. There are some that do. There are some people and some employers that don't put a lot of thought into it, but they really, by and large, do care about getting it right. And here's why. Number one, it is a major component of their cost structure. When a company looks at general and administrative, what it costs to keep the lights on, salary is a huge part of this. So, making sure that you've got people that aren't necessarily going to blow the budget, but you also don't want to be so poor, so cheap in terms of making the offer that it's going to, impact them. Salary, and everybody knows this, it does serve as a competitive factor for talent. If people know that an organization is willing to offer more than, organization A is willing to offer more than organization B, the chances are that people are going to give organization A more of a look. It does drive engagement and retention. And people that generally tend to feel underpaid generally tend to feel underappreciated as well. So the longer that somebody will stick around is often, but not fully, there are many factors that go into this, but often the compensation is tied to the retention, whether or not someone wants to stick around, if they feel that it's fair compared to the market. There's a factor called internal equity. If you haven't heard about this, what this means is that, let's say that you see at a company, everybody that comes in that's doing a sales job makes in the range of between 55 and 60,000 on their base salary plus bonus or commission. And if somebody comes in that is making 80,000 as their base and the same type of commission package, it throws what's called as the equity off. So a lot of companies will look at what is the internal equity. Are people generally in a comparable range for what would be appropriate for the salary, for the skills and experience that they bring to the table? And it's not an individual thing, it's a group thing. There's also legal compliance. Many government jurisdictions care about making sure that people are paid equally or appropriately for the same type of work, not the least of which is the U.S. Department of Labor for those in the United States. Other states have their own laws, so minimum wages, whatever else, they want to make sure that they're compliant with those laws. And this is our corporate director of compensation here at Insider Career Strategies, so just thought I'd share that. As you go into the process, as you go into the negotiation process, it is essential to know your worth. You shouldn't go into this process blind. This is very much it's a game theory exercise because it's a lot of knowledge. The individual that has the most knowledge typically tends to have the advantage in the process. So it is important for you before going into a job search, before getting into the negotiation, to do your research to understand what your value is in the market. And luckily, there are many, many different resources that you can look at. By the way, Daniel mentioned that he's going to be posting this on the alumni website. So you'll see some names of some organizations here. You'll be able to follow those based on that. First is you want to benchmark the market demand. Let's say that there is a very hot market for software engineers, which there happens to be right now. Let's put the flip side of that, which is coal miners. It's not a very hot market at this moment, although there is a little bit of an increase in demand for the coal mining market. It's just not what the market is looking for. So with the scarcity of, say, software engineers, or in this market, finance professionals, or a variety of different disciplines, IT, you want to understand what the demand is. Likewise, if you're in a geographic market that is short on a certain talent area but high on another one, you're going to have a better sense of that, because the more demand there is for what you do, the higher people are willing to pay for those services. There is a website called pesa.com, and Pesa is a salary survey website. It is online. There are a lot of different sites. I've seen salary.com, but Pesa is my favorite. The reason that it is my favorite is that Pesa is validated and it's benchmarked and it has the most data from a scientific standpoint. So what happens is that, I'll give you an example. If you go into Glassdoor, you'll see people that'll post what they made. That's not a scientific sample. That's just people voluntarily going ahead and putting on what they've earned. There may or may not be some validity to that, but when it comes to the portal, that's really what that's about. Pesa, on the other hand, it's market validated. They purchase a lot of premium and professionally used market salary surveys that will give them detailed information. They will also ask you to put some information in as well. It's confidential. I trust Pesa more than any of the other sites on there. But one important thing to keep in mind is, even though it may be listed on a site like Pesa, doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to fit your particular circumstance. You want to validate your pay and your demands for your skills, your level, and your geography. And if you have a lot of very highly valuable skills in this market, and at the level that you're at, if you're a CEO and you're going to make more money than you would as, say, an entry-level programmer. So that's important, but there's also geographic considerations. For example, what you'll often see is that jobs in Alaska often tend to get paid a multiple of what they would get paid in the mainland USA, because there's less population, they need to attract talent, people need to relocate there, so it matters. Other things to keep in mind, Silicon Valley in Northern California, there's just the price of housing is insane there. So the salaries tend to be higher. Of course, you're paying more out to pay for your housing, but you want to understand what it is, and you want to understand what it is that you're looking for and what the market is for the talent that you're looking at in the market that you're going to. When you calculate your salary range, consider everything that goes into this. And what I mean is that there are many different factors that go into your compensation. a job that may be in a certain market, a job in New York City is going to be more expensive to live. You're going to have to pay more to live in New York than you would to, say, Central Ohio, like the Columbus, Ohio area. So that's a factor. If there's going to be a major commute, that's a factor. There's a variety of different things. If you have to buy uniforms, if you have to buy certain things, there's all going to be part of this equation. So you want to calculate your range and consider everything that goes into this. So the factors you look at, first of all, base pay. Base pay can be deceptive, and don't think about it just as apples to apples, right? You've got, when you're looking at base pay, there's a lot of different factors that go into this, but we'll come back to that. There is bonus, additional money that you'll get at the end of the year, tied to performance or tied to the company's performance. Commissions. If it's a sales job, you get a piece of the action. So that does matter, and it's a direct reflection. Your commission structure should reward you for bringing in more business. Health insurance costs and copays. This is a hidden cost that a lot of people don't look at. I worked at, many moons ago, I worked at Bacardi. When I was there, the company paid 100% of the cost of the health insurance deductibles, as well as the copays for the doctor's visits. So during that period of time, it was a very attractive tool. The salaries generally at the time were comparable to or average, or probably around average to the market. But it was things like that that made things a lot more valuable. So when you're looking at, health insurance, a job that may pay you $50,000 with a fully paid health insurance package may be more rewarding than a job that gives you $70,000 with no health insurance when everything is calculated out of pocket. Vacation time. The average company gives 2 to 3 weeks of vacation. Often it's tied to your seniority, how long you've been at the organization. Paid time off has value. And if you're in an organization where you're not going to get that much paid time off, unfortunately, you're going to be spending a lot more time at work. So that has value as well. Life insurance. Something should happen to you. You fall off a cliff, you get into a car accident, something happens where you can't work anymore. That is, your family is taken care of, and often a company will pay for that benefit. Tuition reimbursement. If you're thinking about going back to school, this is unfortunately one of those benefits that seems to be declining in today's market. But when it comes to tuition reimbursement, it's a valuable benefit. And then, of course, career potential. Where can you go in the company? If this job is the dead end, if there are no annual increases, if you don't look like you're going to get promoted, you may want to be compensated for that. Now, of course, that needs to fit within the company's goals as much as yours. So as you determine your salary range, the reason we have this, of course, is apples and oranges. Things do not necessarily line up per the example I gave earlier. So first and foremost, it is very difficult to fully compare the packages. What you want to do is you want to go into a very broad range when you're thinking about what you're looking at for a salary offer. And I'll talk you through the logic on this. So if you are going into a job and often what will happen is that the recruiter or the HR manager or the hiring manager will ask you, what are you looking for in terms of salary? That's great if you're looking at a situation where, it's guaranteed that you're going to be earning more, but even so, you may still be leaving money on the table. So if you say to a company, for example, they say, what are you looking for? And you tell them you're looking for $70,000. They say, that's great. We're going to commit you to that. And then you get the offer and the package comes back. The benefits are terrible. There's no bonus ability. You're actually in a worse position than you were in your previous job, making less money in base salary. So the way that you want to approach this is to give the employer a very broad range. And the spread that you're looking at is between $20,000 and $30,000. It's huge. It's a huge spread. But the way to look at that is that if you give an employer a very broad range of what you're looking at, it's very hard for them to pin you down to a specific figure. That way, you're going to have the room to negotiate once you get further down the road. Not every employer is going to go for that. Some are going to try to pin you down, but in terms of what's an exact number, but if you have the flexibility, you can give a very broad range, it's going to give you that ability. Whereas if you say, I want 70, they offer you the package, it doesn't look very good, you say, I can't accept this. They say, well, you've committed to 70. Then you look bad. You have two choices, either decline the offer and not negotiate or leave the table altogether. So you want to start the range above your true minimum when you're looking at this. So let's say that you're looking at a job, you want a job that's paying $100,000. So you offer, I am looking for roles that are paying between 105 and 125 all in. So that includes, you're talking about total compensation, everything including the health, the dental, the disability. And again, it's important to say what you're looking at. You don't want to necessarily focus on where you've been too much. A lot of companies do like to use your prior salary history as the benchmark of where they should pay. So the more that you can give a range of where it is that you're thinking about being, the more that you're going to help them understand what your perception is of the market and your value. So whatever you pick, this is essential. You absolutely need to be consistent in the negotiation. And if you have a situation where you give a figure, you say, I'm looking for 105 to 125, they come back at an offer of 125, and you say, I'm sorry, I'm really looking for 130 based on what I'm seeing in the market, that's going to reflect extremely poorly on you. And I have been at companies where they have withdrawn offers based on that reaction. So it is essential that you're consistent in negotiation. It is essential that if you are aiming high, that's fine. Just don't go beyond what you've stated. Unless you've stated nothing at all, that's a different conversation entirely. But companies really do want to see what your expectations are. It is your integrity at stake. And if they feel that they're not going to be negotiating with you in good faith, then the company may just simply walk away altogether. All right, so everybody's been familiar with the screening call. This is when the corporate recruiter or an agency recruiter, depending on what the job is and who they've got engaged, calls you up and wants to get you on the phone before they spend the time and expense of bringing you into the office. They want to have a conversation with you to calibrate your expectations, your experience, make sure that you validate against the job description, and of course, salary. So let's talk about the screening call. Do not be the first to bring up salary. Did you notice it's in bold? Ever, ever, ever. Don't bring up salary first. All right. Companies hold a special bargaining chip in this job search where they want to be the one to bring it up. If the employee, or the candidate rather, brings up salary first, it tends to reflect poorly on the candidate, where they may seem that they're motivated by money as opposed to the job or the career potential, which are the things that an employer really wants. Is it fair? No. It's absolutely not fair. There's no transparency in the process, and the employers definitely have an advantage from that standpoint. But that being said, this is the reality, and it's one of those things that unfortunately it's just considered bad form, and it may stop the whole process in its tracks. So you want to de-emphasize the focus on salary. You want to really focus on what is it that interests you about the job. So, there's several things about this. What is it that the role is of interest to you? Do you want to move forward in your career? Have you heard good things about the company? Do you think it'd be a great place for you to develop the next stages of your career? Focus on the future. Really focus on the future, not the past. The future is going where it's going to get you. So this is a situation where you want to talk about what the role the company plays in your professional future and the fact that you can play in theirs. So it's also important to know, I know that in New York State and Massachusetts, and I think California as well, it is illegal for companies to ask for your salary history. It gets back to a point that I made before, which is that if an employer is asking you based on your salary history, maybe you've been underpaid in a previous job. Maybe you weren't rewarded appropriately. Maybe you were making too much for the job, and you could position yourself out of the role, but you know that the expectations are going to be lower in the other job that you're looking at, but you're really interested in the role. So many companies have banned the employers from asking this question. And it's important for you to know that. If you're in a state that is a no-ask state, know your rights. That's when it's very important for you to focus, again, on the future, where you want to be in terms of salary, where you feel that you can contribute in terms of salary and the company's profitability. So highlight the ranges you're considering. You know, there's a big difference between saying I would like between 70 and 100,000 and saying I am looking right now at roles between 70 and 100,000. The first one says what you're looking at is a desire. The second one says to an employer, it conveys that you are actively in the process and talking to employers about these ranges. It's an implication, but it can only help your bargaining position. So let's talk about negotiation strategies. There are several different ways to deal with this. So the offer comes to you, the company gives you the written offer, there it is. Scott, we're very excited for you to come and join the company. What do you do? All right, so you've got several different ways to deal with this strategy for negotiation. This can happen either at the very beginning of the process, and frankly, you should be in control of this process as early as possible, or at the point when you get the offer. But this is really more geared towards at the beginning. So company says, hey, Scott, what are you looking for in terms of salary? Strategy one, play it dumb. Here's what I mean by this. And this works especially good with people, especially well with individuals who are coming straight out of school, or people that have been out of the workforce for a while, or people that haven't looked for a job in a while. Hey, Scott, what are you looking for in terms of salary? Well, company X, I really don't know. It's been a very long time since I've looked for a role, or this is my first job professionally that I'm looking for in the market. So I don't have a specific figure in mind. Now, what you're doing is you're doing two things. Number one, hopefully you've done your research and you're not as dumb as you're acting in this situation. But what you're doing is you're basically putting it back on the company. You're telling them, you're conveying two messages. Number one is, I don't know. I'm giving you some power to deal with this. But message number two is, please help me, please educate me. And here's why this is an effective approach. Let's say that you're talking to a company and you're thinking about a range of up to 70,000. And you play it dumb, you tell them what you're thinking about, you don't know, and the company says, well, this role is going to pay 80 to 100. Well, what you've done is you've essentially upped your amount with that company by at least $10,000. So by playing it dumb, you may have opened a door for them to give you some additional information. Now, also, there may be companies, and I'm not going to lie, there may be companies that want to take advantage of you, think that you're not going to be very in tune with what the market pays. So just be savvy enough. If they come back with a figure that seems low, then you can always come back with and say, well, that seems a little bit low. Is that appropriate to the market? But either way, your goal here is not to stop the job interview, unless the job is something you clearly don't want and you're definitely worlds apart. But often negotiation will happen after this point. Strategy two, broad salary range. Again, this is what I talked about earlier. I'm looking at roles between $70,000 and $90,000. Okay, so again, broad range gives you a lot of different wiggle room. That's the range I'm looking at, total compensation. So it gives everybody a little bit of room to try to sharpen this as you go down the path. Next strategy, here's where I've been, here's where I'm going. So you're not necessarily required to tell in certain states what you've been earning, but this may be a great platform for you to do it. Now, you need to really know what your market worth is if you're going to do this. So give you an example. Let's say that you're a software engineer. You know that in your last role you've been underpaid. So you go into an interview, you get the call from Google. Okay, what are you looking for? Well, I can tell you right now, I am earning $70,000 as a software engineer with 5 years of experience. I am looking at jobs that are in the range of between 120 and 150. Now, this requires a lot of chutzpah. You've got to have a lot of guts to go here. But if you're very clear that that's what you're going to move for, then you may be in a situation where you can do this. And if it's a company that's got a lot of demand and they've got a history of paying well, maybe it's the way to do it, because at least what you're doing is you're putting your cards on the table and you're telling them where it is. Now, if you tell them where you're going and the range is a little bit higher, there is a risk. They may say, well, we're really outside the range. At that point, it is okay to ask for a little bit of clarification. Okay, can you give me I'm sorry to hear that. Can you give me an idea of what the range is for this role? I don't mean to be pushy, but can you help me understand? And at that point, they may share with you some of the data, at which case you say, great, thank you. Yes, let's keep the conversation going. Again, focus on total compensation. Don't get fixated on a salary number. This is all about the whole package. Salary, benefits, bonusability. If you're moving to a higher cost market, say you're going from Ohio to California, that's going to be much more expensive. So look at the whole package. All right, so HR calls you up. They say, Scott, great news. We're giving you an offer. You've got it in your hands. The power is now yours to do as you please. So you have a few options. The first thing is you can negotiate, okay? You can negotiate an offer, but you've really got to ask yourself if it's worth it to do so. So, let's talk through the scenarios. Maybe you get everything you asked for, but maybe there is a little bit more than what you asked for. The company's clearly sending you a signal. They'd like to have you on board. You need to make a calculated risk as to whether or not it's really worth it going back for more. In this particular case, if you've done your research and the data shows that the offer is spot on, that you're going to feel good, you're going to feel energized about going to the company, then it's probably wise at that point to accept what they have, do it quickly, and get on board. But it is also just one important thing. It's also okay for you to say, this is great, thank you. Can I have a day to just think about this and get back to you? It's looking very promising. And sometimes that time is good. It gives you a little bit of time to reflect. You don't make a rash decision. You don't look desperate. But in this case, scenario one, it's probably not the worst thing to accept the offer. Now, there we go. So consider accepting the offer ASAP. Tread very, very carefully if you're negotiating anything. If this offer is really good and you go back asking for more, you do have the risk of coming across as a little bit greedy. So scenario two, the offer comes up short. You've given a range of 100 to 120. They come back at 95. Okay? So this is the point when you really need to ask yourself, is it worth negotiating? If it's worth negotiating, and in this case it usually is, you've been very transparent, you've shared what your expectation is, call. Do not email. Call the person who extended the offer. Keep in mind, the salary negotiation process is very tense. It can be very difficult. You want to come across as collaborative as possible. And doing this by email is very passive aggressive. A phone call is usually the best way to do this. So call the person. If they're not there, leave them a very friendly voicemail. Hi, I just wanted to speak with you. I've received the offer. Thank you. I was wondering if you had a few minutes to go over it with me. Then when they contact you, this is very important. Reiterate your interest in the position and your desire to make this work. Okay, what you're doing is you're throwing them a bone. You're giving them an opportunity to show that, yes, they are coming to you in good faith. You're coming back to them in good faith. And now you've basically, what you're saying is, I've essentially expressed my interest in the job. Let's just get to yes at this point. And then clearly indicate your concerns respectfully. If you have a concern, don't start defensively. Don't indicate this is a lot less than what I indicated. Make your argument, make your business case. I came to the table, I indicated that my range was this. Can you please walk me through what the difference is? And based on my experience, I'd like to understand how you arrived at this figure. So this is where it gets tricky because, again, going back to the initial slides, This may be an equity issue. It may be an internal politics issue. It may be a cost issue. It may be something where you never really talked about the salary in depth at the beginning and the conversation got deferred. But there are different ways to make up the difference. So let's say you're looking for 100 and they come back at 95. Well, okay, maybe they can make up the difference for that first year in terms of a bonus of $5,000 on a sign-on bonus, with the idea that next year there's going to be a salary adjustment. Maybe there is a promise that in 6 months that you're going to be reviewed. You get it in writing that there will be a review of your performance, with the idea that you may be able to get to a different place. Maybe they're willing to offer some extra vacation time, which again, there's value to being able to take a week off without having to work. But try to see if there's different ways to make up the difference. Maybe they've got a generous benefits package about things that you didn't consider, but see what the commonalities are, not what the differences are. And then give them an incentive to meet your target. This is where you're throwing them the bone. John, I really want to accept this offer. And if the company comes back and they offer me 100, which is only 5,000 from where we talked about, I promise you I will accept the offer on the spot. So often what will happen is now you've given them something that they can go back, they can make the business case. They'll say, look, is it really worth, going back and forth about this figure? Then they can come back to you and try to meet that target. So some additional final thoughts, and by the way, we'll get into some questions. Don't be a victim of bias. And what I mean by this is that there is a lot of bias in the marketplace. Gender. Sorry to break this to you, but women earn on average 76% of what a male earns for the same job. Know your market data. Don't let this focus on this. You want to make sure that you are getting paid accordingly. Ageism. Sometimes somebody's at the tail end of their career, and, often somebody who is at the tail end of their career may be willing to give away more as a candidate to the employer to get the promise of security for a longer term job, the chance to continue contributing to a 401k and having a steady paycheck. You've got to consider all your circumstances, but don't necessarily let a company take advantage of that. If you have marketable skills and they're appropriate to the market, you should understand that your skills do have value there. Also, there are other biases. I mean, look, you don't have to be you'd have to be naive not to understand that there are biases in terms of schools, race, ethnicity, a variety of other things, pregnancy status, other things that an employer cannot legally consider in terms of what a salary offer should comprise of. So, be aware of what the biases are and be prepared to address it. When you give notice to your current employer, you want to be prepared. By the way, the customary is 2 weeks. 2 weeks notice is considered the standard to an employer. Anything longer than that, maybe outliving your welcome. Anything shorter than that, maybe something that you leave the company high and dry. Remember, this is your reputation. You want to leave on a positive note. But typically what happens is you walk into your boss's office, you give them your letter of resignation, here it is, and what will happen is typically one of three scenarios. Scenario one, Scott, thank you so much for your service. We really appreciate it, and we hope that the next 2 weeks will be a smooth transition. That's usually the best case scenario. Scenario two, they don't really like the news. They think you're going to take all sorts of corporate secrets or bring down morale. Here's a box, get out. Be prepared for this. Companies do this. They may have security walk over, stand over your desk while you empty it out, or have you come back on a Saturday to empty out your belongings. Unfortunately, you've already let the cat out of the bag. So if they do that, guess what? You've got 2 weeks to take vacation. Scenario three, come into my office. Let's talk. This is counterofferville. Now, what will happen is that the boss may get into their mind, oh my God, Scott's leaving. I'm not going to have anyone to do this job. Let's see if I can pay him to stick around. These are dangerous territory. Accepting a counteroffer from your current employer is dangerous territory. And it's important for you to note that I've seen this happen to a lot of people, where what happens is that they go ahead, the company gives them a counteroffer, they give them the promotion or raise that the employee felt like they deserved for years before this. They've already sent to you a message that they weren't willing to give it. Now they're willing to do it under pressure. What happens is that either you go, you get the counteroffer, and you stick around, and it may work out great. Everything is forgotten, but they may also feel slighted by the fact of the perceived disloyalty. And what I've seen happen many times is that someone goes ahead to get a counteroffer, and basically the employer uses that as a method to keep you around while they look for the replacement. So if you do accept a counteroffer, be very aware. There's a lot of risk involved in taking a counteroffer. It's often fraught with more danger than benefit. And you need to remember that you went outside and you shot for another job based on the fact that you weren't satisfied to begin with. So it's important to stay true to that. And if you do end up accepting a counteroffer and you decline the offer that you'd already accepted with another company, you're going to have burned that bridge as well. The job is ultimately yours to whether to accept or decline. So, you get this offer. It's a really nice offer, but it does or does not meet your needs. Look, will companies be unhappy if you decline the offer? Yeah, probably. But the fact of the matter is you've got to do what's in your best interest. And sometimes there is such a thing as a bad company. Sometimes there is such a thing as a bad move. It may very well be within your discipline to decline it, but nobody is forcing you to accept the offer. You need to do what's in your best interest. And last but not least, act in good faith. Your reputation depends on it. The job market is, yes, we live in the US, for example, a country of 350 million, but your community is much smaller than that. If you're in a certain sector of an industry, people talk, they know each other, reputations follow you. You want to make sure that you're acting in good faith. Your reputation is your most valuable asset, not just the work you do in the job, but how you handle things, your ethics. So you want to make sure to give that your reputation the tender love and care that it deserves as well. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it. At this point, I will open the floor for questions. So, sir, Daniel, it's up to you.
All right, thank you so much, Scott. We do have a couple questions here that have already come in, but I would encourage participants, go ahead, hover over the screen, find that Q&A button, and submit your questions now. So our first question came early on in the presentation when you were talking about considering cost of living. Is there any resource that you would point folks toward so that they could get a sense of cost of living if they're looking at relocating to a new city?
Yes. So PESA, again, is an excellent resource for that. There is a lot of data on that. But if you just go online and you go and Google cost of living comparison, you'll be able to find a lot of very good tools. But you also need to keep one thing in mind, okay? This is important too. Supply and demand also play into the equation. Think about all the young folks that go onto the market every year in Boston and New York. Two cities that have a lot of talent, people that are exiting college, they're migrating to these towns. So there may often be a lot more people than there are jobs, which may drive the salaries down regardless of the cost of living increase. So you need to be aware of that, and you need to understand your circumstances.
All right, great. And we have another question here. What happens if a company doesn't take the debate on the play it dumb strategy? So if you go in and you are, following that advice to say, I'm not really sure, what happens if they try to really pin you down? Do you kind of tip your hand at that point and give them one of those broad ranges, or do you say, how would you wiggle out of that situation?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And there are a lot of companies. I'm in Florida, and Florida companies are notorious for it. They push and they want to know what you've been earning. The best approach there is for you to have done your homework, know what you're looking at. And then this is when you go to that other approach where you say, you've got two options here, okay? You can either try to win them over on your side. And there's a big difference between saying, hey, can you tell me the salary for the job? And saying, hey, listen, I really don't know. Can you give me an idea? What is the range? I'd like to understand what you're looking at for this role. Then you're starting to be collaborative. The other alternative is you say, well, again, I'm currently at this figure. I am looking at this range. Can you tell me if that is realistic? Mm-hmm. And then you're putting it on the company. You've given something away. There's a lot of people that won't give anything away. I hate to say it, but, it's up to you to act in good faith. It doesn't necessarily mean the company's going to.
Yeah. All right, we've got another question here from Nick. I'm in a no-ask state and have not had any employers ask me about my previous salaries. However, every recruitment agency asks for this. I assume that companies can use recruiters to get around the no-ask law. Is it better to give the information to the recruiter or to change the discussion to salary desire and what you're looking for, what you've seen in the market research?
That's an outstanding question. And by the way, so that you know, if the recruiter is contacting you for a job in one of these no-ask states, they are breaking the law. Even if they're located in Ohio and they're doing a search for New York, they are breaking the law. So it's important for you to know the law. But here's the thing too, okay? You are their commodity. If the recruiter is trying to place you into a job, you don't want them to come up with any surprises. And one of the worst things that can happen is that you don't at least talk through salary of what you're looking for with the recruiter. So, the other thing is too, if you come across combative and you say, listen, I'm not required under state law to tell you this, the recruiter may not necessarily take to that well, and they may decide to move on to another candidate. So you need to make a calculated risk. I think it's very important for you to kind of set the parameters of where you're looking as opposed to where you've been.
All right, thank you very much for that. I had a question, and it gets into a couple other questions that have come in. When you said, if an employer makes an offer to you and you want, time to think about it, to consider it, maybe, do a little bit more research before you accept, what would you feel is a reasonable amount of time to ask for? If an employer is pressing, I need an answer by end of the day tomorrow, can you even negotiate that to give yourself a little bit more time to notify your current employer or, go back and forth and do a little bit more research? What would you say is a reasonable length of time?
Yeah, that's a great question. Companies often like to pressure and they like to put that on, but it also depends on your circumstances. And I'll give you an example. All right, if you're a recent MBA and you're coming out of an MBA program, there's a certain window of period of time where they know that you're talking to other employers. They know that all these offers are going to manifest at a certain period of time. So maybe you're talking to the employer and they give you an offer in February and the start date's in April, but you expect that the other companies are going to have their final decisions by March. In that case, you have a little bit of wiggle room. Tell them, look, here's what's looking, what it's looking like. I'm talking to other companies. I'm being recruited by other companies. The timeline they've given me for an answer is this date. Is this acceptable? The company may not be okay with it, but you have to decide. These things do have a shelf life. It's like a carton of milk. You can't buy a carton of milk now, and 2 years from now expect it to still be good. There is an urgency. There is a reason why they're recruiting you. When it comes to a professional job, I've seen people take everywhere up to 2 weeks. That is a very long period of time in the corporate world. If you ask for 2 weeks, the message that you're sending to the company is you're not really serious unless you can validate it with a good reason. So let me give you an example. Let's say you are the cat's pajamas. You have a skill set on a technology that nobody else has. Okay, you're being recruited by Google and Facebook. You tell Google, I have an interview with Facebook next week. They're probably going to understand that. They're going to say, okay, well, we'll give you that time to work that out. But if you've got an offer from a company and and you don't have anything else in the hopper and it's a job that you're looking to take, and even if it's a job you're not sure about, how much time do you realistically need to think about it? The sooner you get back to them, the more energy you're going to bring with it, the more excited they're going to be to have you as part of the organization. I'm not saying you give away your bargaining leverage, but the further you push it out, the further the message that you send that you are just not interested. But again, every situation is individual. You need to use strategy and tact when dealing with it.
Great. So we've got a lot more questions coming in.
Fire away.
All right, here we go. So are there regulations on companies posting the cost of health insurance or that full benefits package online? Is that something you can ask for to review it during your due diligence? And if some employers don't have that information readily available, is it okay to ask them to provide that before you accept any offer?
Okay, so there is no law that I'm aware of. Again, I'm not an attorney, but there is no law that I'm aware of that requires them to post all that information. Best-in-class companies do because they realize it's a good recruitment tool. So you'll often see that on the employment portal. but often they'll get into the vague details, because the truth of the matter is every state has different rules, every region has different rules, so they don't want to give away too much. But when you get the offer, yes, it is absolutely imperative on you, not appropriate, but imperative on you to ask the details. Great, I see the offer. Can you tell me a little bit about this? Sometimes there's a waiting period before you can collect the benefits. You need to know how much the benefits are going to cost you, what's involved. Once they've extended an offer to you, all bets are off on that. Now it's your job to do your due diligence. If they are not willing to share that information with you in a form that you can synthesize and analyze, run like hell.
All right. Great advice. So we've got a couple folks, Danielle and a couple others are asking for recommendations for a raise in your current job. So you're not necessarily asking for a promotion, and you're not, kind of going out and finding another offer to negotiate with your current employer, but you're just going into the conversation of negotiating a raise. Do you have any general tips? How would that differ compared to some of the advice that you've already shared today?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the most important factor to keep in mind on this is you do not want to ruin, you don't want to ruin where you work. You don't want to end up with a confrontational situation. The fact of the matter is that, even if they turn down your request, you don't want to go into a situation where everyone's going to feel uncomfortable, look at each other for the next month or beyond. Mm-hmm. So when you go into this, everybody's situation is individual. I would advise everybody a little bit differently, but what I would say is have your facts ready. If you believe that, one of two circumstances, either number one, you are underpaid against the market, mm-hmm. and you may find out that data from different means, that's a whole different can of worms. By the way, be very cautious of the water cooler gossip. Somebody says that somebody's earning twice as much as you are. You don't know that. You have no idea. Unless it's validated, it's hard to say. But, you want to go in and you want to come in with a strong business case. So the first thing is you make a call to your manager and you say, hey, listen, can I sit down with you for a few minutes? Again, anytime you're giving something like this, a company is going to get nervous. You want to sandwich bad news with good news. Hey, Julie, I've really enjoyed working here at the company. Don't worry, I'm not giving you my notice. I really enjoy working here. This has been great, and I really have taken on a lot of new challenges. I would like at this point to see if we could revisit my compensation. As you are aware, I am currently earning this. I've done some benchmarking. I've gone to PESA. I've seen what's out there on the market. The range for this type of role is typically A to B. I was wondering if we could have the opportunity to discuss an adjustment on this. Again, I want to reiterate, I love the job. I love the company. I really appreciate what the opportunities are that you've given me, and I want to see if there's some way that we can close the gap on this.
All right, and we've got another question here to dive a little bit deeper into the gender pay gap.
Yep.
Do you have any insight onto what women might do differently in negotiations to help alleviate that? Is it just the fact that men are more apt to negotiate in itself, or are there certain things that you would recommend a woman do that might be a little bit different from a man trying to negotiate his offer?
Yeah, this is a multi-layered kind of question. Number one is societal bias. Another one is that you may have a woman who's been out of the workforce for several years, raising a child, been a full-time parent. Although men are doing that on a more and more frequent basis, the company may perceive it as having been out of the workforce for a while. You may be rusty. The bottom line is, number one, go armed with facts. Understand what the market data is. They're not going to share with you the books, okay? They're not going to tell you what everybody's earning. Although I have heard some interesting cases of companies posting all their salary data, although I'm not exactly sure how well that works. But, from the standpoint of understand what the market really bears, and then don't be afraid to negotiate. Don't be afraid. Don't take a backseat role in this. I think focus less on the gender aspects of it and focus on your value. Focus on the value you bring to the table and what it is. And then anytime you're asking for something, you're making a business case. Explain why you're worth what you're worth. I have X years of experience. I've worked in this technology. I know it, and I can provide value to you from day one.
Great. We've got another question here from Venus.
Keep them coming.
what if you get a verbal tentative offer before the potential employer checks your references? So this person says, they asked if I was happy with the given amount, and I had asked for a little bit more, but within the general range, they were at least speaking the same language. So it's been a few days and they haven't checked my references. So would you recommend that someone waits to negotiate salary until they get the written offer? Or is that something that you can start talking about just once the offer has been made verbally?
That's a great question. And first of all, I'm not a huge fan of verbal offers. I think that they don't care. The important thing is that an offer letter has some weight as a legal document. A verbal offer is just he said, she said. So, I think in any of those situations, rather than get into the whole negotiation game first, I would say, great. When can I expect the written version of this offer to review? And that's when they can start sharing with you all the details, the benefits, and all that kind of stuff. Because again, a verbal offer, this is what we're thinking. There's a big difference between saying, here, we are offering you X dollars versus, we are going to offer you something in the range of X to Y. It's, one is feeling you out. The other one is giving you a firm commitment. And if they're ready to offer you a firm commitment, say, great, I'd love to see the offer in writing and then we can talk about it. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't mean that you can't send some positive signals. You know what? I think we're in the ballpark. I very much look forward to seeing the writing.
Okay. Great. So this next question goes back to something that you talked about, where someone might be returning to the workforce after a break. What advice for salary negotiations do you have that would allow someone to recognize the time that they served and not overly penalize the applicant for the time they spend out of the workplace?
Yeah, it's not an entirely fair level playing field here, unfortunately. But there's a couple of things. Number one is you want to make sure that your resume and your documents represent you in such a way that it doesn't look like there's a gigantic gap on there. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't account for the time, but indicating that you've been Daniel, we lost you. Indicating that there is was that the lights?
It was indeed.
Okay, for those that at home, there's a light sensor there, and if there's not enough movement, the lights go out. That's awesome. Hey, good energy saving part of BU.
Absolutely.
If the first thing is to have, if you can account for that time, maybe you've been doing some other work as well, maybe volunteerism. But if you haven't, that's okay. There's no requirement. But you need to really emphasize that you've been keeping current. Let's say that you're in marketing, you were a chief marketing officer. Well, the world of digital marketing has really changed a lot in the last 7 years. Have you taken some classes to keep current? Are you up on the latest terminology? You don't want to do anything that's going to show that there's gaps in your employment. Mm-hmm. If there are gaps, from a skill standpoint, you need to be prepared. There may be some penalty for that. I'm not saying it's fair, but it's one of those things that if there's going to be a perceived ramp-up period, then you need to explain your way through that.
Okay, we've got one more question here right before we reach the top of the hour. If you know that you're currently underpaid and you're going up for a promotion, a raise with your current employer, how do you negotiate your new salary to make up for the fact that you've been underpaid in the past? Is that something that folks can do? Internally, HR certainly knows what you're currently paid, so they'll see the jump that you're asking for. But can you justify that with the market research that you've talked about? Yeah,
that's a tough one. A lot of company policy, typically they'll look at a promotion. So there's typically ways that they'll organize this. Keep in mind, I'm not a compensation expert in the sense of I'm not a certified comp person. My perspective is more from the recruitment standpoint. But here's what I've seen. So typically what will happen is a company they'll generally have a range that they offer people for promotion. And it'll typically be in the 15 to 18% range. They'll figure, okay, that's the range. If you've typically been at the higher end of the range for your type of job in the past, you might get a lower version of the raise. If you've been at the lower end, they might get a higher. But, there's nothing to say that this is hard and fast. If you're valued, and obviously you are because they're offering you a promotion, you've got a little bit of leverage there. Go in with your facts. Know what the market pays. The company, you need to ask yourself, though, am I underpaid in compared to the market, or am I underpaid compared to my peers, or am I underpaid compared to both? you may not know how you're doing against your peers. But if you work for a company that is notoriously cheap, then you may end up in a situation where you may end up ahead from, of your peers, but you may not be ahead of the market. So data, data, data.
All right, and we are right up against the top of the hour. So for those who need to take off, I'll conclude the formal webinar, but we do have a couple other questions that Scott has generously offered to stick around after the fact, and we'll run through. So we'll continue the webinar for those who can stay on. So
Perfect.
Scott, I just want to say thank you again for sharing your expertise. We always appreciate the webinars that you deliver for the BU audience. So on behalf of the entire Alumni Association, I just want to thank you once again.
My pleasure.
And I also want to thank all of those who have participated in the webinar today, especially those who have donated to BU in the past. We certainly couldn't do it without your support. And I want to make sure everyone knows that this year, BU's annual Giving Day is coming up on April 3rd. And we are very excited. We hope it'll be another historic day for alumni support, showing their love for BU. And I'd encourage you to visit bu.edu/Giving Day for all the info. You can see all the different funds that you can support. And do keep an eye on all of our channels on social, on the website. On April 3rd, it's going to be a pretty special day. And we also have one more terrific webinar coming up tomorrow. Leadership and Communication gets you to the top. This is the last webinar as part of this year's Alumni Career Week series, but we will certainly continue our webinar series throughout the rest of the year. I'd encourage all of you to visit our website, bu.edu/careerweeks. That's where you can find more information about that webinar and sign up if you're not signed up already. As always, if you or any BU alumni that you know would be interested in presenting a professional development webinar, or if you have a topic you'd like to showcase for the Alumni Association, please feel free to contact me in the Alumni Relations Office, and you can reach me on my email, dangard@bu.edu. That's DANGARD. Thanks so much to everyone out there for your time. Have a great day and a great evening wherever you might be. And for those of you who can stick around, we're going to do a couple more questions with Scott. So let me just jump back over to our questions. And again, I thank everyone for your really great questions, thoughtful questions that have come in. So we have a question here from Sophia. Do you have any suggestions on how to identify whether or not your industry or field is in demand right now? You give the example of higher demand for software engineers, lower demand for coal miners. What about some of the less obvious fields than those two? Do you have any specific research tools, or is it really pace all the way?
I'm a big fan, in case you can't tell. Mm-hmm. I think, one of the amazing resources you have as a BU alum is the Career Center. And regardless of which college you went to, talk to your Career Center that's part of it. If you went to Questrom, talk to the Career Center. These Career Centers have a vested interest in keeping you employed and happy because, employed and happy alumni make great donors. And, great advocates for the university. So, my advice is talk to them, but, it doesn't take much. I think what I would do is the very first thing is take a look at your job discipline and look in, Indeed, see how many jobs there are that are coming up there. If you're seeing, the real-time implications of that, it's going to go far ahead of what any surveys will tell you. Indeed's the big one. The career centers are great. And just the news. Follow the news, see who the employers are. They're often talking about what the demand is that they're driving. There's a lot of different media sources. I don't have any particular consolidated one, but I think the Career Center is probably one of your best bets.
All right, great. And I can certainly endorse that as well. You're always welcome to reach out to us. We can connect you with your Career Center at your school and college. We're always happy to give alumni the resources that they need in order to be successful in their careers. So we have another question here from Jordan. Jordan is currently finishing an MBA and switching to a higher paying industry. What's the best approach to prove your net worth as someone with a newly minted degree, but with experience in a different field?
Oh, I'm intrigued. So Jordan, can I ask you if you've got time here to tell us what you're doing and where you were and what field you're looking at?
Yeah, and I'll certainly keep you updated if we do see another response come in from Jordan.
If he answers, let me know. But I think One of the beautiful things about an MBA is it's a nice pivot point. And what happens is, and I actually wrote a blog on this last week. I mean, basically what you've got is that a lot of people go to do their MBA, they take the break, and they really look at, making an adjustment. A lot of companies will view that as a clean break. They figure you've invested in yourself, so making that move to a higher value industry. I think, your studies are going to drive a lot of that. What did you work on? What kind of dissertations and thesis did you do? But I don't think that climb is actually going to be as difficult as you think it is. I think that from a top-rated program, I think Questrom is what, number 35 now? I mean, I think it's that's pretty close to top tier. I don't think you're going to have that much of a gap in terms of selling your case to another industry.
All right, great. So this question comes from Catherine, and I really like what she asks here. She says, are there any other red flags that we should keep an eye out for? One of the phrases that you used was, run like hell during the negotiation period. So I think what we were talking about then was, if an employer isn't being upfront about their full healthcare package and kind of what's included in that total compensation, are there any other things that come to mind that would be serious red flags?
Yeah, I think that there's a few things. Number one is if they pushing if they are pushing in terms of staff problem, if they want to know exactly the figure at the very beginning, I think that's a figure problem. And I think also, if you are if they're rushing you through the compensation piece and not really addressing it, if they're trying to get you to commit really quickly and not willing to give you any additional time, I think those are pretty good flags.
Yeah, great. A couple folks have asked where they can find the details of this webinar after the fact. So we'll list it in our webinar library. You can find it at bu.edu/alumni/webinars. But even if you just go to bu.edu/alumni, find the career resources, and you'll see the link there. We will include the full recording here today so you can hear all the questions that have been asked. Aaron was looking for a little bit more information on how best to not burn bridges. And I think, you touched on the fact that people understand that, if you're on the job market, you might get multiple offers and you're going to have to say no to some and yes to one. So do you have any other tips on how best to negotiate but also not burn bridges with the company that you ultimately decline?
I think that there's two things. Number one is flattery and collaboration. I think you need to constantly remind the company that you think they're amazing and you really want to build a career there. But I think the other part is that I think you need to approach it with, I really want to work with you to make this happen. Mm-hmm. I think if you can really accentuate those two things, look, there's a big difference between saying, hey, I got an offer from company X. Can you match this? And there's a big difference between that and saying, look, I got an offer from company X. I really want to work with your company. The other one is $10,000 more. Is there any way that we can bridge that gap? And if we can, I'll join you tomorrow. There's a big difference between the approach and that. People know. They know that you're going to be talking to multiple employers. If they don't, they're idiots. I mean, because the fact of the matter is, it's like, this is a labor market, it is what it is. Companies don't have the monopoly on talking to multiple people. So it's, I'm sorry for the harsh language, but they have to understand. But if you go into it with a little bit of flattery and really come with the end in mind and building a collaboration to get where you need to go, you'll find a way to make that happen.
Great, and we'll just take one more question here today.
All right.
This comes in from an anonymous attendee who's saying that they submitted an application online, and in that online process, one of the fields that was required was the salary expectation line.
Yep.
This person happened to say that, they didn't have a salary expectation at this time, interested in learning more about the role. Do you have other tips, other ways that people can handle that when, you're filling out an online application and that box is required? You have to put something in there. Is there something that you would recommend?
Yeah, it's if you have the option of putting 0, just put 0. If it's a text, it's like a alphanumeric where you can put a word in there, put the phrase negotiable. So that's what I would do. But a lot of employers will use that as a measure to see that you're not outside the range that they're looking for. Like they use it as a search field.
Mm-hmm.
So, unfortunately, not every company's up to snuff on that.
All right. Well, Scott, thank you again for all of your time, taking some additional time here to run through all these questions. And again, for everyone on the webinar, if you'd like to get in touch with Scott directly, his contact information is up there. You can see scott.singer@insidercs.com. I'd certainly encourage you to reach out, take a look at his website. Again, his blog posts, we often see them featured in the BU Alumni LinkedIn group. That's another great place to kind of get additional information, find other resources, and stay current on this topic. So Scott, thank you again for all your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. My pleasure. Have a fantastic afternoon. Thanks for having me.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.